My name is Rebecca Chen, and 3 weeks ago, I walked into Sterling National Bank wearing my work clothes and was treated like I didn't belong there. The security guard followed me around like I was about to steal something. The teller spoke to me like I was wasting her time, and the branch manager actually asked me to leave because I was making other customers uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that I had just deposited $12 million into that very bank the month before. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you think this story is heading somewhere incredible, you're absolutely right. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a small apartment in Oakland where my mother raised me alone after my father disappeared when I was 7. Maria Chen worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, she cleaned offices downtown. Evenings, she stocked shelves at the neighborhood grocery store. And weekends, she did laundry for families in the nicer parts of town. I remember watching her count and recount the few crumpled bills we had each week, trying to stretch them to cover rent, food, and my school supplies. Money was always a source of stress in our household. We shopped at thrift stores and ate a lot of rice and beans. When the other kids at school talked about family vacations or new clothes, I learned to stay quiet. My mother never made me feel ashamed of our situation, but I understood instinctively that we were different from the families who lived in houses instead of apartments, who drove cars instead of taking 3 buses to get anywhere. The first time I set foot in a bank, I was 12 years old. My mother needed to cash her paycheck from the cleaning company, and their regular check cashing place was closed for renovations. We walked into First Community Bank together, me and my secondhand jeans and worn sneakers, my mother in her cleaning uniform because she had come straight from work. The difference in how we were treated compared to the other customers was immediate and humiliating. The teller looked at us with barely disguised irritation as if our presence was an inconvenience. She examined my mother's identification multiple times, asked unnecessary questions about where she worked and why she was cashing the check there instead of her usual place. Other customers were greeted with smiles and pleasant conversation, but we received cold efficiency at best. I watched my mother's shoulders tense as she answered each question with patient politeness, and I felt something burning in my chest that I would later recognize as determination. Walking home that day, my mother noticed my unusually quiet mood. She stopped to the bus bench and sat me down next to her work-rough hands folding over mine. "Mija," she said in her gentle voice that carried just a hint of her Mexican accent, "someday you will have enough money that banks will compete for your business. But no matter how much you have, never forget what it feels like to be treated like you don't matter. Promise me you'll remember this feeling." I promised her that day, and I kept that promise through everything that followed. High school was a blur of advanced classes and part-time jobs. While my classmates worried about prom dates and college parties, I worked at the local electronics store after school, fascinated by how computers and software could solve problems and create efficiency. The store owner, Mr. Kim, noticed my aptitude and started teaching me basic programming during slow periods. College was a scholarship to UC Berkeley combined with every work-study program I could qualify for. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, and spent every free moment in the computer lab. My roommate thought I was antisocial, but I was actually building the foundation for something bigger than either of us could have imagined at the time. The idea for my company came during my junior year when I was helping my mother navigate the nightmare of medical bills after she injured her back at work. The amount of paperwork, the confusing insurance procedures, the hours spent on hold with different departments trying to get basic information, it was clear that healthcare administration was broken and inefficient. I started developing software that could streamline patient data management and automate many of the repetitive tasks that were bogging down medical offices. I graduated with a computer science degree and immediately threw myself into developing my healthcare software full-time. My mother was skeptical about my decision to turn down job offers from established tech companies, but she supported me anyway, even when it meant I moved back into our tiny apartment and contributed nothing to household expenses for months while I worked 18-hour days on my laptop at our kitchen table. The breakthrough came when I landed my first client, a small family practice that was drowning in administrative work. My software reduced their patient processing time by 60% and eliminated most of their paperwork errors. Word spread quickly through the medical community, and within 6 months, I had 12 clients. Within a year, I had 47 clients and had hired 3 employees. Chen Tech Solutions grew faster than I had ever imagined possible. Healthcare systems across California started implementing our software, then hospitals in other states began calling. I reinvested every penny back into the company, hiring brilliant programmers and expanding our capabilities. The long hours never bothered me because I remembered those nights watching my mother count bills and promise myself that we would never live like that again. By my 28th birthday, Chentech was generating $23 million in annual revenue. I had achieved everything I had dreamed of during those difficult years growing up, but I still drove my 10-year-old Honda and lived in a modest apartment. Wealth felt surreal after so many years of financial stress, and I found myself almost afraid to fully embrace it. My mother had been able to quit 2 of her 3 jobs and was finally receiving proper treatment for her chronic back problems. I had purchased a small house for her in a safe neighborhood with a garden where she could grow the vegetables and flowers she had always talked about wanting. Watching her happiness as she showed me her tomato plants was worth every sleepless night I had spent building the company. The irony of my situation was that despite having more money than I had ever dreamed of, I still looked and acted like the working-class woman I had always been. I wore practical clothes, drove a practical car, and lived a practical life. Nothing about my appearance screamed wealth or success, which is exactly how I ended up being humiliated at Sterling National Bank on what should have been a routine banking visit. 3 months earlier, I had decided to move my business accounts to Sterling National because they had offered competitive rates and claimed to specialize in serving growing businesses. The account manager I worked with during the initial setup, David Morrison, had been professional and attentive, walking me through their services and assuring me that Chentech would receive the highest level of customer service as one of their valued commercial clients. The account opening process had been handled entirely through appointments in Morrison's office, with paperwork signed in conference rooms and transactions processed electronically. I had never actually visited the main branch as a regular customer, which is why none of the frontline staff had any idea who I was or what my account balance looked like when I walked through their doors that Tuesday afternoon in my jeans and work boots. That Tuesday started like any other workday. I had spent the morning reviewing quarterly reports with my team and was feeling particularly good about Chentech's trajectory. We had just signed 2 major hospital systems and were on track to exceed our revenue projections by 15%. I needed to make a quick stop at Sterling National to deposit some checks and handle a minor issue with our payroll account that required an in-person signature. I dressed casually that day, wearing my favorite pair of broken-in jeans, steel-toed work boots, and a simple black hoodie with the Chentech logo embroidered small on the chest. This was my standard outfit for days when I wasn't meeting with clients, practical and comfortable for moving around our office and warehouse spaces. I threw my hair back in a messy ponytail, grabbed the paperwork I needed, and headed to the bank. Sterling National's main branch was located in the financial district, a gleaming glass building that projected success and stability. I had always appreciated their downtown location because it was convenient to several of our major clients. The lobby was spacious and modern, with marble floors, high ceilings, and the kind of elegant furniture that whispered expensive rather than shouting it. The moment I walked through the revolving door, I noticed the security guard's attention focus on me with laser intensity. He was a large man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of suspicious expression that suggested he had decided I didn't belong there before I had even finished entering the building. I felt his eyes tracking my movement as I approached the information desk to ask about wait times for account services. The woman at the information desk glanced up from her computer screen with barely concealed irritation. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, her blonde hair styled in a perfect bob that probably required daily professional maintenance. Her nameplate read Jennifer Walsh, Customer Service Coordinator, and she examined me from head to toe with the kind of assessment usually reserved for potential shoplifters. "Can I help you?" she asked, in a tone that suggested helping me would be a significant inconvenience to her day. "I need to speak with someone about my business account," I replied politely. "I have some paperwork that requires signatures and a deposit to make." Jennifer's expression shifted from irritation to skepticism. "Business account?" she repeated slowly, as if I had claimed to be the Queen of England. "What type of business?" "Software development and healthcare technology," I answered, maintaining my professional demeanor despite her obvious doubt. She clicked through several screens on her computer, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the keyboard with unnecessary force. I'll need to see identification and account information before I can direct you to the appropriate representative. I handed over my driver's license and business debit card, watching as she scrutinized both items far longer than necessary. She held my license up to the light, compared my face to the photo multiple times, and even turned the card over to examine the back. Meanwhile, other customers who had arrived after me were being directed to representatives without any such thorough examination of their credentials. Rebecca Chen, she read from my license with carefully pronounced syllables, as if my name was particularly difficult. And you said this is for Chen Tech Solutions? That's correct. She continued typing, her frown deepening with each keystroke. I'm not seeing any notes in your file about expected visits or scheduled appointments. Our business account holders typically coordinate their banking needs in advance. I wasn't aware that was required for routine transactions, I said, feeling the first stirring of genuine irritation. I just need to make a deposit and get some signatures notarized. Jennifer's phone rang, and she answered it with a completely different tone, warm and welcoming. Sterling National, this is Jennifer. How may I provide excellent service today? She spent several minutes chatting pleasantly with whoever was on the other end, occasionally laughing at what were apparently hilarious comments, while I stood waiting with my paperwork in hand. When she finally hung up, she turned back to me with renewed suspicion. I'm going to need you to wait over there, she said, pointing to a small seating area near the entrance. Someone will be with you when they're available. The seating area was positioned in full view of the security guard, who had not stopped watching me since I arrived. I settled into one of the uncomfortable chairs and pulled out my phone to check emails while I waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I watched as at least 8 other customers were immediately directed to available representatives, their transactions handled efficiently and courteously. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit approached Jennifer's desk and was immediately greeted with a brilliant smile. "Mr. Patterson, how wonderful to see you again. How was your trip to Europe?" They chatted like old friends while she quickly arranged for him to meet with a personal banker. The entire interaction took less than 3 minutes, from arrival to being escorted to a private office. I approached the desk again, my patience wearing thin. "Excuse me, but I've been waiting for over 30 minutes. Is there an estimate for when someone will be available?" Jennifer looked up from her computer with barely disguised annoyance. As I mentioned, business account holders should really schedule appointments in advance. We're quite busy today, and our representatives are all occupied with priority clients. "Priority clients?" I repeated, making sure I had heard correctly. "Clients with substantial accounts and long-standing relationships with the bank," she explained, in the tone one might use to explain basic concepts to a child. "I'm sure you understand that we need to prioritize based on account value and client needs." The security guard had moved closer during this exchange, close enough that I could smell his coffee and aftershave. He positioned himself slightly behind me and to my right, a classic intimidation stance that made it clear he was ready to escort me out if necessary. "I think there might be some confusion about my account," I said carefully, trying to maintain my composure. "Perhaps you could check again or have someone look up my full account details." Jennifer sighed dramatically and returned to her computer, her typing more aggressive this time. She spent several minutes clicking through screens, her expression growing more puzzled with each page. Finally, she picked up her phone and had a brief, hushed conversation with someone, covering the receiver with her hand so I couldn't hear the details. "I'm sorry," she said after hanging up, "but there seems to be some kind of system issue with accessing your account information. I'm going to have to ask you to come back another day when our technical problems are resolved." This was clearly a lie. The system had been working perfectly fine for every other customer I had observed. "What kind of technical problems?" I asked. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific details of our internal systems," she replied primly. "For security reasons, you understand." The security guard took another step closer, and I felt the weight of his presence like a physical pressure. Other customers were beginning to notice the situation, some watching openly while others pretended not to stare. I realized that this had escalated beyond poor customer service into something much more deliberately hostile. Is there a manager I could speak with? I asked, my voice remaining steady despite the anger building in my chest. Jennifer and the security guard exchanged a meaningful look. "Mr. Rodriguez is in meetings all afternoon," she said. "However, I can leave a message for him to call you tomorrow." "I'd prefer to wait for him to be available," I said firmly. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," the security guard interjected, speaking for the first time. His voice was gruff and authoritative. "The bank has policies about loitering, and you've been here for quite a while without conducting any business." "Loitering?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "I'm a customer trying to access my account." "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises," he continued, his hand moving to rest on the radio attached to his belt. "If you refuse to leave voluntarily, I'll need to call local law enforcement." The lobby had gone noticeably quieter, conversations dropping to whispers as the drama unfolded. I felt dozens of eyes on me, some curious, some judgmental, some sympathetic. The familiar burning sensation from my childhood bank visit was back, but this time it was mixed with something much more powerful than determination. This time it was fury. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet space. "You're asking me to leave because I don't look like I belong here?" "We're asking you to leave because you're disrupting other customers and refusing to follow proper banking procedures," replied, but her voice lacked conviction. I looked around the lobby at the other customers, most of whom were now openly staring at the spectacle. A few looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but none spoke up. The security guard's hand remained poised over his radio, ready to call for backup if I continued to resist. "Fine," I said quietly, pulling out my phone.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'll leave, but first, I think I need to make a phone call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. David Morrison, the account manager who had personally handled my business setup just 3 months earlier. As the phone rang, I kept my eyes fixed on Jennifer, who was watching me with growing unease. The security guard shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with the prolonged standoff, but unwilling to back down. "David Morrison speaking," came the familiar professional voice through my phone. "David, this is Rebecca Chen from Chen Tech Solutions," I said clearly, making sure my voice carried across the now silent lobby. "I'm standing in your main branch right now, and I'm being asked to leave by security because apparently I don't look like I belong here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You're being asked to leave?" "That's correct. Your customer service coordinator, Jennifer Walsh, has determined that I'm not a priority client, and your security guard is threatening to call the police if I don't vacate the premises immediately. I thought you might want to know how Sterling National treats customers with $12.7 million in combined business accounts." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Jennifer's face had gone completely pale, and I watched her frantically typing on her computer, presumably trying to access my actual account information. The security guard was looking back and forth between us, clearly sensing that the situation had shifted dramatically, but not yet understanding how. "Miss Chen?" David's voice came back, tight with what sounded like barely controlled panic. "Please, don't move. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming down to the lobby right now, and I'm bringing Mr. Harrison with me." "Mr. Harrison?" I asked, though I suspected I knew who he meant. "The bank president," David confirmed. "Please, just give me 2 minutes." I ended the call and slipped my phone back into my pocket. The lobby remained unusually quiet, with conversations that had resumed doing so in hushed tones. Jennifer was now frantically making phone calls of her own, her previous composure completely shattered. I could hear fragments of her urgent whispers, something about major account and serious mistake. The security guard seemed uncertain about what to do next. His hand had moved away from his radio, but he maintained his position near me, as if he was still prepared to follow through on his threat despite the obvious change in atmosphere. "Is there a problem here?" A woman's voice interrupted the tension. I turned to see an elderly customer, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit, looking disapprovingly at the security guard. This young woman has been standing here quite patiently, and I couldn't help but notice she's being treated rather poorly. "Ma'am, this is a private matter between the bank and this individual," the security guard replied, but his authoritative tone had weakened considerably. "Nonsense," the woman replied crisply. "I've been banking here for 37 years, and I've never seen a customer threatened with arrest for trying to conduct business. What exactly has she done wrong?" Before anyone could answer, the elevator doors opened and David Morrison appeared, followed by a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit who could only be the bank president. David's face was flushed, and he was walking with the quick, purposeful stride of someone trying to prevent a disaster. The man beside him carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority, but I could see concern etched in the lines around his eyes. David's gaze swept the lobby until he found me, and I watched recognition flood his features. He approached quickly, followed closely by the bank president. "Miss Chen," he said breathlessly, "I am so deeply sorry for this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I repeated calmly. "I was told I needed to leave because I was loitering and disrupting other customers. I was also informed that I'm not a priority client and that business account holders should schedule appointments for routine transactions." The bank president stepped forward, extending his hand. "Miss Chen, I'm Robert Harrison, president of Sterling National. Please accept my sincere apologies for what appears to be a serious failure in our customer service standards." I shook his hand but didn't return his smile. "Mr. Harrison, I've been banking here for 3 months, and this is the first time I've attempted to use your branch for routine services. I have to say, it's been an educational experience." David was now speaking in urgent, hushed tones to Jennifer, who looked like she wanted to disappear through the marble floor. The security guard had retreated several steps and was trying to blend into the background, clearly realizing that he had made a significant error in judgment. "Miss Chen," Mr. Harrison continued, "I would very much like to invite you to my office so we can discuss this situation properly and ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." "I appreciate the offer," I replied, "but I think this conversation should happen right here, in front of the same customers who witnessed your staff's behavior. Transparency seems appropriate, don't you think?" Mr. Harrison glanced around the lobby, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the discussion, but unwilling to refuse my request. "Of course. I'd like to understand your bank's policy regarding customer treatment based on appearance," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the space. "Are customers routinely profiled and categorized as priority or non-priority based on their clothing and perceived social status?" "Absolutely not," Mr. Harrison replied firmly. "Sterling National serves all customers with equal respect and professionalism, regardless of their background or appearance." "That's interesting," I said, "because your customer service coordinator specifically told me that your representatives prioritize clients with substantial accounts and long-standing relationships. She also suggested that I should have known to schedule an appointment for routine banking, something that was never mentioned when I opened my accounts." Jennifer had gone from pale to a sickly green color. David was now standing behind her, reading something on her computer screen with an expression of growing horror. I could see him pointing at various numbers and shaking his head in disbelief. "Furthermore," I continued, "your security guard threatened to have me arrested for loitering when I asked to speak with a manager. I'm curious about your training procedures and whether intimidating customers is standard protocol for handling service issues." The security guard, whose name tag read Frank Morrison, stepped forward reluctantly. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize. I misunderstood the situation and acted inappropriately. It won't happen again." "Frank, isn't it?" I asked, and he nodded. "Frank, what exactly led you to believe that I was a security threat? Was it my clothes, my age, the fact that I asked questions when I wasn't being helped?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly realizing that any answer would only make things worse. Mr. Harrison intervened. "Miss Chen, I can assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated and appropriate corrective action will be taken." "Corrective action?" I repeated thoughtfully. What kind of corrective action do you think is appropriate when a customer with multiple seven-figure accounts is treated like a potential criminal? The number seemed to hit the gathered crowd like a physical force. I heard several gasps and saw heads turning as people processed what I had just revealed. The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier smiled with what looked like satisfaction. David had finished his urgent consultation with Jennifer and approached us with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Harrison," he said quietly, "I've confirmed Miss Chen's account details. Chen Tech Solutions maintains a primary business account with a current balance of $8.2 million, a payroll account with $1.4 million, and a reserve fund containing $3.1 million. There are also two personal accounts with combined balances of approximately $400,000. The lobby fell completely silent. Mr. Harrison's face had gone rigid with what I suspected was barely controlled fury, though whether directed at his staff or at the situation itself was unclear. Jennifer looked like she might faint, and Frank, the security guard, seemed to be studying his shoes with intense concentration. Additionally, David continued, his voice growing quieter with each word, Chen Tech Solutions has been pre-approved for a $15 million line of credit, and we've been actively courting their expansion business for our commercial lending division. $12.7 million, I said clearly, addressing the lobby at large. That's how much Sterling National considered not worth basic courtesy today. I'm wondering what your minimum balance requirement is for respectful treatment. Mr. Harrison was now visibly struggling to maintain his composure. "Miss Chen, this is completely unacceptable, and I want to personally ensure that we make this right. What can we do to restore your confidence in Sterling National?" I considered his question for a moment, looking around the lobby at the faces watching our exchange. Some customers appeared shocked, others embarrassed to have witnessed such poor treatment of a fellow patron. Jennifer was crying quietly at her desk, and Frank had retreated to his station near the entrance. "Mr. Harrison," I said finally, "I don't think Sterling National and Chen Tech Solutions share the same values regarding how people should be treated. I'll be closing all of my accounts and transferring my business elsewhere." "Please," he said quickly, "let's not make any hasty decisions. Perhaps we could discuss additional services, improved terms, or other ways to demonstrate our commitment to your business." "My decision isn't hasty," I replied calmly. "It's based on 45 minutes of observing how your institution operates when you think no one important is watching. That tells me everything I need to know about your company culture." I turned to David, who was standing frozen beside his boss. "David, you'll need to prepare account closure paperwork for all Chen Tech accounts. I'll arrange for the transfers to be completed by the end of the week." "Miss Chen, please reconsider. This was an isolated incident, a training failure. It doesn't represent our true values." "Actually, I think it represents your values perfectly," I replied. "When people show you who they are, believe them the first time." I walked out of Sterling National that day with my head held high, leaving behind a lobby full of stunned customers and panicked bank employees. Within hours, news of the incident had spread through my professional network. By the next morning, I had received calls from 3 competing banks, each offering premium services and personal attention that Sterling National had deemed unnecessary for someone like me. The aftermath was swift and decisive. David Morrison called me 17 times over the next 2 days, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about retention packages and executive apologies. Mr. Harrison sent a formal letter acknowledging the discriminatory treatment and outlining new diversity training initiatives, but the damage was irreversible. I transferred all $12.7 million to Pacific Trust Bank, whose president personally handled my account setup and treated me with the respect I should have received everywhere. Within a week, I learned through industry contacts that both Jennifer Walsh and Frank Morrison had been quietly terminated. David Morrison was transferred to a smaller branch office, effectively ending his advancement prospects at Sterling National. The bank's regional compliance officer had launched a full investigation into their customer service protocols, apparently discovering that my experience wasn't entirely isolated. More importantly, I kept the promise I had made to my mother all those years ago. I remembered what it felt like to be dismissed and diminished because of someone else's prejudices about my worth. That memory became the foundation for Chentech's company culture, where we evaluate people based on their character and capabilities rather than their appearance or background. 6 months later, I established the Chen Foundation, focusing on financial literacy and entrepreneurship programs for underserved communities. We partner with credit unions and community banks that demonstrate genuine commitment to treating all customers with dignity, regardless of their account balances or zip codes. The lesson from that day at Sterling National wasn't about money or revenge. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve from anyone, whether they're family members, romantic partners, employers, or financial institutions. When people show you through their actions that they don't value you, believe them and act accordingly. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions or treatment of you. It's determined by how you choose to respond when faced with disrespect. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away from people and institutions that don't deserve your presence or your business. Never let anyone make you feel small just because they can't see your value. And remember, the money you spend and the relationships you maintain should reflect your standards, not accommodate other people's prejudices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.